boxing news.
Okay, we'll start with this. The latest as it pertains to unbeaten up-and-comer in the minimum weight division, Christina O'Hara of Ireland. Apparently a fight between her and Pekalska has been ordered for what is the EBU title. Unbeknownst to most, Christina O'Hara is promoted by Queensberry Promotions. She signed to them in August of last year. In that way, I would have expected to see more of her by now. It's been almost a year since she signed to them, sporting a professional record of 4 wins with no losses, no draws, no recorded knockouts, not yet. To Pekalska, who sports a professional record of 8 wins with 1 loss, no draws, 1 recorded knockout, having never been knocked out in 9 professional bouts, several years older than Christina. Ewelina is 37, whereas Christina is 28. Ewelina, she last saw action in October of last year opposite the ring debutante Alexandra Madryskuska.
These fucking names.
Ewelina fought 2 times last year, 2 times, and in that way she has seen action in the last 12 months. Whereas Christina only saw action once. Just once, late last year, in November, opposite the ring Christina Navarro, in what was her Queensberry Promotions debut. She signed to them in August, but they didn't get her out there until November, and it's the only fight that she's had so far under the promotional banner.
She's got lost time to make up for.
This is for the EBU title in the strawweight division, otherwise known as the minimum weight division. This is where Senicia Estrada reigns as that division's undisputed champion, and in that way, it's a good time for a straw weight or a minimum weight to be here because Senicia's not staying at minimum weight. In all likelihood, she's on the verge of moving up in weight, and when she does, she'll vacate all the alphabet titles she currently holds, at which point a fighter like Christina will have the opportunity to pick one up.
And even if by some chance Senicia decides to stay here a while longer, hypothetically speaking, to run it back with Yo Castavalle, try to win a more decisive victory, well, by the time Christina's ready to fight for a title, Senicia likely will have moved up already.
Why is that good?
Because Senicia Estrada is a vastly more experienced fighter across more weight classes than Christina O'Hara. Christina is only 4-0. It's going to be a while before she's ready for a fight like that with a fighter like that. But if the titles go vacant, well, that improves her chances of seeing herself become a world champion herself.
Christina, who I vaguely recall comes from a decent amateur background, having seen her in action once or twice, she keeps her shape pretty good, best described as a mid-range to inside boxer puncher.
Good jab, good speed, good counters, combinations, shot selection.
You can see that she comes from a decent amateur background. You can see just looking at her at only 4-0 that she's well schooled. And given that she is a fighter of Irish descent being promoted by Queensberry Promotions, we all know the Irish boxing scene's ability to create stars in their own neck of the woods.
They're a fiercely loyal fan base, not dissimilar from what you see here in America with fighters of Puerto Rican descent or fighters of Mexican descent. That's how the Irish are in the UK.
I'm only surprised that we haven't seen more of Christina O'Hara in action more often, because if she signed to Queensberry all the way back there in August, it's been almost a year, and she's only fought once under the banner, but we know that Queensberry have done several shows since then.
She's got to hit the ground running this year.
But I like what I see. There is some star quality with a fan-friendly aesthetic, a well-schooled boxer.
You can see that.
And the fervent support from the Irish boxing community for Irish boxers. There's genuine potential there for not only Christina to become a champion,
but perhaps a marquee attraction.
They've got to get her out there at least 3 to 4 times this year. At least. Because she's only 4-0. And in those early stages of a boxer's career, that's when they fight the most. They need to fight the most because they need to pick up that experience in those rounds in the bank.
This is for an EBU title.
What often services as a starter belt for many fighters that fight across the pond.
Christina's going to be fighting for it against Ewelina, and we will give Ewelina a closer look as more fight news develops and as a potential fight date approaches.
Men's super lightweight news. Sean Gibbons, who handles the career of newly crowned WBA champion Isaac Pitbull Cruz, says, Pitbull Cruz and Andy Ruiz are the cause for Crawford's ticket sales. All I'm going to tell you is Pitbull Mania. I would say Pitbull Mania, Andy Ruiz. Los Angeles is an extension of Mexico. It's not Omaha, Nebraska, but His Excellency has stacked such a good card together that you have a lot of people who maybe aren't boxing fans, but they're big event fans. But I'm going to say the profits in the pudding. Crawford has never fought in Los Angeles. Andy Ruiz and Pitbull pretty much sold out the Staples Center. When Isaac was with Gervonta Davis, he did a huge crowd. Just did a great crowd here with Rolando Romero. So I'm going to say a lot of it is going to be Pitbull and Andy Ruiz for sure. Is that true? And is that a slight on Terrence Crawford?
Is it?
To be honest with you. When they initially said that Crawford would be fighting in Los Angeles, I scratched my head. Seemed an odd location for a Terrence Crawford fight. And then they announced the rest of the card, and it all made sense.
Sean is right.
Now that doesn't mean that everybody showing up is an Isaac Cruz fan or an Andy Ruiz fan, that nobody's showing up for Crawford. That doesn't mean that. I'm 100% sure some of those people showing up are showing up for Crawford's fight because it's the first time he will have fought since annihilating Errol Spence. But Andy is making a contribution, and so is Isaac. That's the reality of it. If you put the card in Los Angeles, you did it for a reason.
Strategic placement of the show, where there is a large concentration of Mexican-American and Mexican fight fans, it's deliberate, it's by design, and there's nothing wrong with that. It all adds to the decorum.
You would structure a card this way with a fighter of Mexican descent in LA for the same reason you would structure a card in the East Coast with Puerto Rican fighters of Puerto Rican descent at the Hulu Theater at Madison Square Garden.
Or Irish fighters.
So Sean is absolutely right. Both Isaac and Andy are making a sizable contribution to the show, drawing fans to it. More particular to Isaac, who's newly crowned WBA champion. This past weekend, Gervonta Davis, his old buddy, said he'd be willing to move up and fight him again. But should Isaac give him the time of day? Is it worth it? The second fight would be bigger than the first, because the first fight was impromptu. Isaac was only standing in for Rolly Romero, who had some legal woes, some legal troubles, and it didn't do nothing at the box office. 2 years later, it'll do a lot better because more people know Isaac, because he's a champion now.
The thing is that if you run it back with Gervonta Davis, he's gonna try to A-side you.
So is the fight with Gervonta so big that it's more worthwhile to be the B-side to Gervonta than the A-side to someone else, or being on equal footing with someone else? What gets you more money?
That's not the only big fight that Isaac can have.
Remember that he's a champion, and remember that there are 3 other champions at the weight. You could do a big fight with Teofimo, you could do a big fight with Devin.
The difference.
You might be on more equal footing with Devin Haney, with Teofimo Lopez, and Liam Botto than you would be with Gervonta. If you negotiate with Gervonta, he's going to try to A-side you. You're going to be the B-side.
With them?
Well, Devin's been on pay-per-view before, but he hasn't done the kind of numbers that Gervonta has done, and Teofimo, as accomplished as he is, he's never been on pay-per-view before. So that might put Isaac on a bit more equal footing with them than he would be with Gervonta.
We'll see.
It's up to Sean, and it's up to Isaac what direction they want to go in if they do beat Rayo Valenzuela. Now, if they don't, that puts the kibosh on the whole goddamn thing, and Rayo might end up fighting Gervonta.
In defense of his WBA title.
And Gervonta would definitely A-side him, even if he does beat Isaac Cruz. Though as far as Isaac's contribution to the show that he is about to fight in, Sean is right. I don't always agree with things that Sean says, but he's right when he says that Isaac and Andy, they're making a large contribution to the show. A lot of people are going to show up to support them. That's the reality of it. That's why they chose that location. There's nothing wrong with that.
It's not a knock on Crawford.
Or the fighter he's about to fight. The champion he's about to fight is Rael Madrimov. Solid guy, well-schooled, good amateur.
But if the location for this fight is in Los Angeles, there's a reason for that.
Shout out to the fact that David has proven my point right, that he's not a power puncher, man. He's not that real monster. He's a volume puncher. But, you know, hey, maybe at 168 he could continue to duck Morel and shit and keep dreaming of Canelo every night. Shout out to you, man.
Maybe now Canelo fights him since he sees that performance, you know?
That caller echoed the sentiments expressed here on the channel that David Benavidez's quote-unquote light heavyweight debut was lackluster. In my opinion, it was mediocre. His contemporary, David Morrell, said as much. Seriously, so many training with legends. If I didn't see anything different in the fight, more of the same. Seriously, no one tells me anything else. I was the terror of the 168 division, and now I will be one of the 175. These people are easy.
David Benavidez made his light heavyweight debut this past weekend. David Morrell is set to make his on the show that we just talked about, the Crawford versus Madrimov card. Is his debut gonna go like David's?
He's fighting Hot Rod. Hot Rod lost one a long time ago to Artur Beterbiev. Coincidentally, Vojdik lost one a long time ago to Artur Beterbiev.
Small world.
Caller didn't think that David Benavidez was a power puncher. I've said that a gajillion times here on the channel. He's a volume guy, that's what he is, not a one-hitter quitter guy.
He ain't got that Beterbiev kind of power.
Did he get a reality check this weekend?
Benavidez never been in there with a guy bigger than him. Never. Never been in there with a guy taller. Never been in there with a guy physically bigger. He was tonight. I think that had a bearing on it. I think that had a little bit psychological bearing, that he couldn't dominate him physically. And physically, I thought it had a bearing where it warmed down a little bit.
Not the only one who noticed that David's punches and his volume, for however long it lasted, it did not have the same effect at 175 against a 175-pounder that it has had at 168 against what are regularly smaller, many times older.
You're only a monster when you've got a size advantage over the guy. Whatever power you had at 168, it didn't carry up like Inouye's power has carried across 4 divisions. Terrence Crawford across 3. David noticed it.
You know that he noticed it because at the post-fight press conference, he starts talking about his hand and his wrist.
He noticed it.
We noticed it. I noticed it. After the 6th round, and it's funny because he was throwing punches and bunches in the first half of the fight, but around the middle, his output starts to slow, he's breathing with his mouth open.
Even when he does get through with a solid shot, every so often, it did not have the effect on a light heavyweight that it has had on smaller fighters.
So trying to stay in character and be that volume puncher at light heavyweight that you have been at super middleweight seems to have wore on David's energy reserves in a way that we haven't seen before, because when have you ever seen David tired?
That's not good.
Without having seen this fight, I would have liked Bivol. I don't think that I like him more now because he's the naturally bigger guy. I think that Benavidez has shown me he fits right into the light heavyweight division. There's no problem with him having moved up. He was always a huge super middleweight, and he's moved up, with no problem.
I would disagree with that. I would. Because David Benavidez is the guy who over a year ago said that he would knock out Dmitry Bivol. You couldn't knock out a 37-year-old Vojdik. How are you going to knock out Bivol? He's several years younger, faster hands, faster feet, better engine, less wear and tear.
Teddy says he would pick Dmitry to beat David. I've said that a gajillion times. I said that plenty of times before this weekend's fight. This weekend's fight was just confirmation
that Dmitry Bivol would do to David Benavidez what he already did to Zurdo Ramirez, because those two fighters are cut from the same cookie cutter. The success they had at 168 relied on the same principle, that they're so much bigger than everybody else. But if you go north of super middle, where the guys are a bit bigger, a bit stronger, more durable, it'll be hard for you to stay in character.
It was this past weekend. People just don't want to admit it.
Let's not kid ourselves. David didn't move up in weight and face a champion, a reigning champion, straight away like Terrence Crawford did when he moved up to 147 and fought Jeff Horner, like he knew he did when he moved up and fought Stephen Fulton straight away. That's not what that was.
He took a more measured approach.
And he didn't stop the guy. Terrence moved up, he stopped Jeff Horn. When he knew he moved up, he stopped Stephen Fulton. David didn't stop a 37-year-old former champion.
So how would he fare against the current champion? He gets taken to school.
Bivol beats him easy, outpoints him easy, and Artur Beterbiev, Artur stops him.
Not that he's looking to fight them, because he isn't.
David, what kind of message are you hoping to send to the light heavyweight division?
I'm just going to be as dominant as I was in the super middleweight division, and like I said, I'm staying here. I'm not going nowhere. I'm looking to campaign here and take all the belts.
2 weeks later.
I'm going to go down to 168, win another world title, if it's with Canelo or whoever.
One fight against the 37-year-old Alexander Vojdik has this guy reevaluating the next 12 months. Oh, now you don't want to stay at light heavyweight? Why not?
You want to go back to killing yourself to making 168 and squeezing into your skinny jeans?
There's a lot of people trying to pretend that this weekend's fight was a masterclass on David Benavidez's part, that if this was an acid test, he passed it with flying colors. Well, then why is he talking about going back down to 168?
You know what this weekend's fight was? What it was supposed to be? A segue to all the alphabet titles, undisputed at 175. And surely making 175 is easier at this point for David than making 168. But you want to go back to 168. Why?
We all know why. Because you ain't no monster.
Jerry
Soriano, your lender for life. I know you're listening.
I want my money.
He wants his money.
I told you David didn't want the winner of that fight. I told you that in spite of all the money that Turkey Al-Sheikh is willing to put up to put David in the ring with the winner of Bivol versus Beterbiev, it was never his intention to face the winner of that fight. The only reason he fought Vajdik is because he didn't want to have to make 168 again. But having been there,
Felt it.
why he wants to go back down. Why am I not surprised?
Some guy named Canelo, does he maybe look at Benavidez as, maybe a little bit more human, a little bit more beatable, a little bit less monster? Does he not look at him now and say, you know what? This might be an opportunity for me if I'm going to do this fight. If Turkey Al-Sheikh is going to come up with, a truckload of money somewhere in the neighborhood of a ridiculous 150 million, but whatever. You know what? Maybe this would be the time for me to step in. I saw, just as a phrase of the phrase they use, maybe the slip showing a little bit of Benavidez, where maybe this would be a time for me to step in and say, hey, I'll do what everyone else has called me out, said I wouldn't do, and he sees something that makes him feel that way.
I agree with Teddy. I think the time is right for Canelo Alvarez to get rid of this guy. He wants to come back down to 168. Bring him back down to 168. That's going to take something out of him, whether he's aware of it or not.
I know that Canelo Alvarez must get sick of these deadbeat boxers that don't want to put in the kind of work that he's put in, but are always shouting his name, looking for a payday, because they know win or lose, they're going to make the most money they could ever make fighting him.
It's the only reason they're calling him out. If it were really about fighting the best, well, David Benavidez would have been a unified super middleweight champion a long time ago because he had a head start. He was there before Canelo. So it's not even about fighting the best or gaining all the belts. You have an opportunity to gain all the belts right there at 175. You just don't want it.
Like I said he didn't.
And Canelo, for all the accolades and how hard he's worked over the years, doing all the heavy lifting, he may not want to give a deadbeat boxer like David the satisfaction.
What kind of message does that send?
Fought around for years, spend a decade in the same weight class, lose your title 2 times outside of the ring fucking around.
And you should get a shot at Undisputed. You should get a Canelo Alvarez fight.
But it's still a big fight. It's a fight that will still draw a crowd. I think it would do over 1 million buys on pay-per-view, so it's worth the hassle. It's worth the trouble. Even if it means giving a deadbeat like David an opportunity he doesn't really deserve.
Canelo should do it, because I think Canelo beats him.